As the 18th century drew to a close, the world stood on the brink of a monumental transformation, one that would change the way people lived, worked, and interacted with their environment. This era, now known as the Industrial Revolution, began quietly in Britain, a country known for its vast rural landscapes, agricultural communities, and centuries-old trades. But over the course of a few decades, Britain would become the epicenter of technological innovation, leading humanity into an age of mass production, mechanization, and rapid urbanization. The conditions in Britain were uniquely suited for this transformation. A growing population, bolstered by agricultural advancements, created a surplus labor force that was eager to find work beyond the fields. The wealth accumulated through centuries of overseas trade and colonial expansion provided the capital needed to invest in new technologies and industries. And, beneath the surface of the British countryside, abundant natural resources, especially coal and iron, offered the fuel and materials necessary to power this new age of industry. At the heart of this revolution were inventions that would forever change the course of history. The steam engine, perfected by James Watt, provided the essential power needed to drive machines that could spin thread, weave fabric, and shape metal at unprecedented speeds. Factories, once small workshops scattered across the countryside, became sprawling complexes of iron and brick, filled with machines that churned out textiles, iron products, and goods at a scale unimaginable only a few years earlier. But the Industrial Revolution wasn't just about technology and industry. It marked a profound social shift, one that would redefine class structures, alter family dynamics, and reshape entire cities. The move from rural farms to urban factories brought millions into cities that swelled with growth, but it also gave rise to new social challenges: overcrowded slums, harsh working conditions, and the exploitation of child labor. Beyond Britain's shores, the innovations of the Industrial Revolution rippled across the globe, changing not only how goods were produced, but also how people connected. Railways and steamships linked continents, allowing raw materials, finished products, and even ideas to travel faster than ever before. The global economy became more intertwined, setting the stage for modern globalization. The Industrial Revolution was not a singular event, but a series of developments that spanned decades, each building on the successes and challenges of the previous generation. In this peaceful and detailed journey, we will explore how this era unfolded, starting with the agricultural advancements that freed labor for factories, through the groundbreaking inventions in textiles, iron, and steam power, and the social upheavals that defined the era. We will witness how factories rose, cities expanded, and society transformed. And while this revolution brought unprecedented wealth and technological progress, it also raised questions about the cost of rapid industrialization. Questions that continue to echo in our world today. The story of the Industrial Revolution is one of human ingenuity, ambition, and the desire to shape a better future. It is a story of how necessity and innovation combined to change the world in ways that continue to influence our lives today. As we explore the dawn of this remarkable era, let the peaceful unfolding of history guide you into a restful sleep, carried along by the engines of progress and the quiet hum of invention. Chapter 1: Innovations in Agriculture and the Prelude to Industry. Before the towering chimneys of factories and the rhythmic hum of machines defined the Industrial Revolution, there was another quiet revolution that unfolded in Britain: the Agricultural Revolution. It was in the fertile fields and rural villages of the British countryside where the seeds of industrialization were first planted, both literally and figuratively. Agriculture, which had been the cornerstone of human society for millennia, underwent profound changes in the 18th century, laying the foundation for the radical transformations that would soon reshape the world. For centuries, agriculture in Britain had followed traditional methods, with small farms operated by families growing crops and raising livestock using simple tools and techniques passed down through generations. However, these methods were not efficient enough to support a rapidly growing population. By the mid-18th century, a series of innovations in farming practices and land management began to emerge, revolutionizing food production and freeing up labor that would later fuel the factories of the Industrial Revolution. At the heart of this transformation was the enclosure movement, a process that dramatically altered the structure of rural life in Britain. For generations, much of Britain's farmland had been organized under the open field system, where strips of land were shared communally by villagers. Under this system, farmers would work together to plant and harvest crops, with each family maintaining a few strips of land scattered across the village. While the open field system fostered a sense of community, it was inefficient and did not allow for large-scale, innovative farming practices. The enclosure movement, which gained momentum in the 18th century, sought to change this by consolidating small, scattered strips of land into larger, privately owned farms. Enclosure Acts, passed by Parliament, allowed landowners to enclose common land, fencing off what had once been open fields and transforming them into private, commercial farms. This process not only increased agricultural productivity, but also fundamentally changed the landscape of rural Britain. For many small farmers and rural laborers, enclosure meant displacement. They were forced off the land they had farmed for generations, and many were left without work, driving them to seek employment in the growing industrial cities. But the changes brought about by enclosure were just the beginning. Alongside the restructuring of land ownership, new farming techniques and tools were being developed that would revolutionize agriculture. One of the most significant innovations was the introduction of crop rotation, particularly the four-field system championed by agricultural pioneers like Charles Townshend. Traditionally, farmers would leave one-third of their land fallow each year to allow the soil to recover, but this practice wasted valuable land. Under the new system, crops were rotated through 4 fields, with wheat, barley, clover, and turnips being planted in succession. The clover and turnips, in particular, were important because they helped replenish the soil with nutrients while providing fodder for livestock. This system allowed farmers to keep their fields in constant use, dramatically increasing crop yields. Another key figure in the agricultural revolution was Jethro Tull, an English farmer and inventor whose contributions to farming technology helped streamline the planting process. Tull's most famous invention was the seed drill, a device that planted seeds in neat rows at a consistent depth, rather than scattering them randomly by hand. This not only improved the efficiency of planting, but also increased the likelihood of seeds taking root and producing healthy crops. Tull's seed drill, along with his advocacy for soil aeration and the use of horse-drawn machinery, helped modernize British agriculture and make farming more efficient. The improvements in farming techniques were accompanied by advances in animal husbandry, or the selective breeding of livestock. Pioneers like Robert Bakewell and Thomas Coke introduced systematic breeding practices that improved the size, strength, and productivity of livestock. By selecting the best animals for breeding, Bakewell and others were able to produce larger sheep with thicker wool and more productive cattle, providing both more food and more raw materials for Britain's growing industries. These agricultural advancements had a profound impact on British society. Increased food production meant that fewer people were needed to work the land, freeing up labor for other industries. At the same time, the population began to grow, fueled by better diets and improved living conditions. Between 1700 and 1800, Britain's population nearly doubled, creating a surplus of labor that would soon be absorbed by the factories and workshops of the Industrial Revolution. The migration of rural populations into cities, driven by the enclosure movement and the increased efficiency of agriculture, laid the foundation for the urbanization that would come to define the industrial age. As small farmers and agricultural laborers were displaced from the land, they moved to towns and cities in search of work, swelling the ranks of the urban workforce. This new labor force would soon become the backbone of the factories that were beginning to emerge, as Britain's economy shifted from one based on agriculture to one driven by manufacturing and industry. The changes in agriculture also had a ripple effect on global trade. With British farms producing more food and raw materials than ever before, Britain was able to export surplus goods to other countries, fueling the growth of its economy and expanding its influence overseas. At the same time, the increased demand for raw materials, particularly cotton, wool, and iron, spurred the development of new industries and technologies, further accelerating the pace of industrialization. The agricultural revolution, while quieter and less dramatic than the later technological breakthroughs of the Industrial Revolution, was nonetheless a crucial precursor to industrialization. It created the conditions necessary for the rise of factories and the mass production of goods, and it transformed British society in ways that would have far-reaching consequences. The innovations in farming techniques, land management, and animal husbandry that emerged during this period set the stage for the explosive growth of industry that was to come, as Britain moved from an agrarian society to an industrial powerhouse. As we move deeper into the story of the Industrial Revolution, we will see how these early agricultural changes, which at first seemed confined to rural fields and pastures, rippled outward to shape the cities, factories, and industries that would come to define modern life. The transformation of agriculture not only provided the food and raw materials needed to fuel industrial growth, but also reshaped the social fabric of Britain, laying the groundwork for the sweeping changes that were about to unfold. Chapter 2: The Invention of the Steam Engine and Mechanization. As the agricultural innovations of the 18th century transformed Britain's countryside and freed up labor, the stage was set for the next great leap: the mechanization of industry. The driving force behind this transformation was one of the most important inventions of the Industrial Revolution: the steam engine. This machine, which harnessed the power of steam to perform mechanical work, would revolutionize not only industry, but also transportation, communication, and everyday life. The steam engine became the beating heart of the Industrial Revolution, powering factories, locomotives, and ships, and forever altering the relationship between humans, labor, and technology. The development of the steam engine was not a sudden innovation, but rather the result of decades of experimentation and refinement. Early attempts to harness steam power date back to ancient times, but it wasn't until the late 17th and early 18th centuries that serious progress was made. The first practical steam engine was invented by Thomas Newcomen in 1712, and it was designed to solve a specific problem: pumping water out of deep coal mines. Coal had become an essential resource for Britain's burgeoning economy, providing the fuel needed to heat homes, forge iron, and later power steam engines. However, as miners dug deeper into the earth to extract coal, they encountered a significant challenge. Water would flood the mines, making it nearly impossible to continue extracting coal. Newcomen's steam engine, known as an atmospheric engine, used steam to create a vacuum that powered a piston, which in turn drove a pump that removed water from the mines. While Newcomen's engine was a remarkable achievement for its time, it was slow and inefficient, consuming vast amounts of coal to produce relatively little power. The limitations of Newcomen's engine spurred further innovation, and it was Scottish inventor James Watt who made the crucial improvements that would propel the steam engine into widespread use. In 1765, Watt, who worked as an instrument maker at the University of Glasgow, was asked to repair a model of Newcomen's engine. In the process, Watt realized that much of the engine's inefficiency came from the repeated heating and cooling of the cylinder, which wasted energy. Watt's solution was simple yet revolutionary. He added a separate condenser, which allowed the engine to condense steam without having to cool the main cylinder. This improvement made the engine much more efficient, allowing it to produce more power while consuming less fuel. Watt's steam engine, which he patented in 1769, became the foundation upon which much of the Industrial Revolution was built. Watt's partnership with industrialist Matthew Boulton in 1775 allowed him to manufacture and distribute his improved steam engines, which were soon in high demand. Factories, mills, and mines across Britain began adopting the steam engine as their primary source of power, enabling them to increase production and reduce reliance on manual labor. The mechanization of industry, driven by the steam engine, transformed key sectors of the economy, particularly textiles, mining, and iron production. In the textile industry, which had long been dominated by small, home-based workshops, the introduction of powered machinery led to the rise of large-scale factories capable of producing cloth at unprecedented speeds. Key inventions such as the spinning jenny, the water frame, and later the power loom revolutionized textile manufacturing, allowing for the mass production of yarn and fabric. These machines, powered first by water wheels and later by steam engines, enabled Britain to dominate the global textile market. The mechanization of textile production had far-reaching effects on society. Factories with their steam-powered machinery could operate on a scale that was impossible for small workshops or individual weavers. This shift led to the rise of factory towns, where entire communities were built around industrial production. Workers, many of whom had previously worked on farms or in small trades, were drawn to these factories in search of employment. While factory work provided steady wages, it also introduced a new way of life, one marked by long hours, repetitive tasks, and often harsh working conditions. One of the key advantages of the steam engine was its versatility. It could be used not only to power machines in factories, but also to drive the pumps, hammers, and furnaces in ironworks, enabling the production of iron on an industrial scale. The demand for iron, which was essential for building machinery, tools, bridges, and later railways, grew rapidly as industrialization progressed. Innovations in iron production, such as the use of coke, a byproduct of coal, instead of charcoal in blast furnaces, further accelerated the production of iron and steel, making these materials more affordable and accessible. The steam engine also had a transformative impact on transportation. In the early 19th century, British engineer George Stephenson adapted Watt's steam engine to create the first steam-powered locomotives. These engines revolutionized transportation by making it possible to move goods and people over long distances more quickly and cheaply than ever before. Railways, powered by steam locomotives, began crisscrossing Britain in the 1820s, connecting industrial centers with ports, coal fields, and markets. The railway system not only facilitated the movement of raw materials and finished goods, but also reshaped the social and economic landscape of Britain, encouraging further urbanization and industrial growth. The steam engine's impact on transportation extended beyond railways. Steam-powered ships, known as steamships, revolutionized maritime travel, allowing for faster and more reliable transportation across the world's oceans. The first successful commercial steamship, the SS Savannah, crossed the Atlantic in 1819, signaling a new era in global trade and travel. Steamships, with their ability to travel against winds and currents, opened up new trade routes and connected distant parts of the British Empire, contributing to Britain's dominance in global trade during the 19th century. Mechanization, powered by the steam engine, became the hallmark of the Industrial Revolution. Factories, ironworks, and transportation systems all relied on steam power to drive their operations, leading to a level of productivity and efficiency that had never been seen before. The steam engine's ability to replace human and animal labor with mechanical force allowed industries to scale up their operations, leading to the mass production of goods and the creation of new markets. However, the rise of mechanization also brought significant social and economic changes. While industrialization created new opportunities for wealth and innovation, it also widened the gap between rich and poor, as factory owners and industrialists amassed fortunes, while many workers endured long hours and dangerous conditions for low pay. The shift from manual labor to machine-based production also led to the displacement of skilled workers, whose traditional trades were replaced by automated processes. This economic shift gave rise to new social tensions, as workers began to organize for better wages, working conditions, and rights, laying the groundwork for the labor movements of the 19th and 20th centuries. The invention and refinement of the steam engine not only powered the factories of the Industrial Revolution, but also fueled the ambitions of industrialists, engineers, and inventors who sought to push the boundaries of what was possible. From spinning wheels and looms to steam-powered locomotives and ships, the steam engine was at the core of this technological transformation. It marked a turning point in human history, when the power of machines began to reshape societies, economies, and the natural world. As we continue our journey through the Industrial Revolution, we will explore how these technological innovations and the rise of mechanization transformed not just industries, but also the way people lived and worked. The steam engine may have been the engine of progress, but it was the people, the inventors, workers, and entrepreneurs, who harnessed its power to build the world we know today. Chapter 3: The Rise of Factories and Urbanization. The mechanization of industry brought about by the steam engine led to the rise of a new type of workplace, the factory. Factories, which centralized production and housed powerful machinery, became the epicenter of industrial activity, changing the way goods were produced and, more importantly, changing the way people worked. The factory system, which emerged in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, marked a profound shift from the traditional artisanal and home-based production methods that had defined manufacturing for centuries. At the heart of this transformation was the textile industry, which was one of the first to embrace the factory system. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, textile production was carried out in small workshops or cottages, where families would spin thread and weave fabric using hand-operated looms. This cottage industry allowed individuals to work at their own pace, producing textiles on a small scale. However, the advent of steam-powered machinery and the growing demand for cloth made this system increasingly inefficient. The introduction of machines such as the spinning jenny, the water frame, and the power loom allowed textiles to be produced at a much larger scale, and it became necessary to centralize production in factories where these machines could be housed. The factory system brought workers and machines under one roof, enabling continuous production at a much higher rate than was possible in cottage industries. These early textile factories, often referred to as mills, became the blueprint for industrial production in other sectors. As factories grew in number and size, so too did the cities that housed them. The Industrial Revolution was not just a story of technological innovation, it was also a story of urbanization. Britain's population, which had been predominantly rural for centuries, began to shift toward urban centers as factories and industrial jobs drew people away from the countryside. Cities like Manchester, Birmingham, and Glasgow grew rapidly, transforming from small market towns into bustling industrial hubs. This mass migration to cities was driven by the promise of steady work and wages in the new factories. However, for many, the reality of urban life was far from ideal. Industrial cities were often overcrowded and poorly planned, with workers crammed into slums and tenements that lacked basic sanitation. Disease, such as cholera and typhoid, spread rapidly in these unsanitary conditions, and life expectancy in industrial cities was often much lower than in rural areas. Factory work itself was grueling and monotonous. Workers, including women and children, toiled for long hours, sometimes 12 to 16 hours a day, in hot, noisy, and dangerous environments. Accidents were common, and there was little regulation to protect workers from the hazards of factory life. Child labor was particularly widespread, as factory owners preferred to employ children for tasks that required nimble fingers and smaller bodies. Children as young as 5 or 6 were put to work in factories, often for meager wages and in conditions that would be considered inhumane by today's standards. Despite these challenges, the factory system continued to expand, and with it, so did Britain's industrial economy. The rise of factories not only transformed the production of goods, but also reshaped social structures and the way people lived. Factory owners, known as industrialists, amassed great wealth and influence, becoming a new class of powerful businessmen. Meanwhile, a new working class, made up of factory laborers, emerged as the backbone of the industrial economy. The rise of urban industrial centers and the growth of the factory system were closely tied to the development of transportation networks, which allowed raw materials to be brought to factories and finished goods to be distributed to markets. As we will explore in the next chapter, the transportation revolution, fueled by the steam engine, played a crucial role in the expansion of industrial production and the growth of cities. The factory system, with its emphasis on mass production and efficiency, became the defining feature of the Industrial Revolution. It was a system that brought both progress and hardship, innovation and inequality. As factories grew and cities expanded, the Industrial Revolution set in motion a new era of human history, one in which machines and technology became the driving forces of economic and social change. Chapter 4: The Transportation Revolution: Roads, Canals, and Railways. As factories sprang up across Britain and production soared, the need for an efficient system to move raw materials to industrial centers and finished goods to markets became increasingly important. In the early stages of the Industrial Revolution, transportation was a major bottleneck to industrial growth. Poor roads, slow-moving horse-drawn carts, and the reliance on rivers limited the speed and efficiency with which goods could be transported. Recognizing this, innovators turned their attention to revolutionizing transportation, and in doing so, they unlocked the full potential of industrialization. The transportation revolution during the Industrial Revolution unfolded in three key phases: the improvement of roads, the construction of canals, and, most importantly, the advent of the railway system. Each of these developments played a crucial role in enabling Britain to become the first truly industrialized nation, and together they helped to integrate regions, facilitate trade, and shape the rapidly changing urban landscape. The improvement of roads, paving the way for progress. In the early 18th century, Britain's roads were in poor condition, making overland travel slow, difficult, and expensive. Most roads were little more than dirt tracks, prone to becoming impassable during wet weather. Horse-drawn carts struggled to navigate these rough paths, and moving heavy loads of coal, iron, or textiles over long distances was both time-consuming and costly. The turnpike system, introduced in the 17th century, was one of the first attempts to improve Britain's roads. Under this system, private companies were granted the right to build and maintain roads, and in return, they could charge tolls to travelers and transporters who used them. While turnpikes led to some improvements, they were often limited in scope and did not provide the widespread infrastructure needed to support the growing demands of industrialization. The real transformation in road transportation came with the work of engineers like John Macadam and Thomas Telford in the early 19th century. Macadam developed a new method of road construction, known as macadamization, which involved laying small crushed stones in layers, creating a smooth, durable surface that could withstand heavy traffic. Macadam's roads, known as macadam roads, were a significant improvement over the muddy tracks of the past, making it easier for carts and carriages to transport goods across the country. Thomas Telford, another pioneering engineer, built on these innovations by designing roads that were not only durable but also capable of handling heavier loads. Telford's roads featured raised embankments to improve drainage and prevent flooding, as well as carefully designed bridges and culverts to ensure smooth and continuous travel. His work on the London to Holyhead Road, which connected the capital to the port of Holyhead in Wales, became a model for road construction throughout Britain. The improvement of roads helped to speed up the movement of goods and people, making transportation more reliable and reducing the cost of trade. However, as Britain's industrial economy continued to expand, even better solutions were needed to move large quantities of heavy goods, such as coal, iron, and textiles, over long distances. The answer to this challenge would come from Britain's extensive network of rivers and the development of a new mode of transportation: canals. The Age of Canals. Waterways for industry. While rivers had long served as natural highways for transporting goods, their limitations soon became apparent as industrial production ramped up. Rivers were often too shallow, winding, or seasonal to provide a reliable means of transport for the growing industries that required a steady supply of raw materials. To address this, entrepreneurs and engineers turned to the construction of artificial waterways, canals. The British canal boom began in the mid-18th century, as industrialists sought more efficient ways to transport coal, iron, and other bulky goods from mines and factories to markets and ports. Canals, with their straight, man-made channels and lock systems, provided a reliable and cost-effective way to move large quantities of goods over long distances. The narrowboats that traveled along these canals could carry much heavier loads than traditional carts, and the smooth, calm waters made transportation faster and more predictable. One of the earliest and most successful canals was the Bridgewater Canal, completed in 1761 by the Duke of Bridgewater, to transport coal from his mines in Worsley to the rapidly growing city of Manchester. The canal reduced the cost of transporting coal by half, making it more affordable for factories and households in Manchester and fueling the city's industrial growth. The success of the Bridgewater Canal inspired a wave of canal construction across Britain, linking coal fields, ironworks, textile mills, and ports in a network that facilitated the flow of raw materials and goods. Engineers like James Brindley, who designed the Bridgewater Canal, and Thomas Telford, who contributed to many of Britain's canals, became instrumental figures in the development of this new infrastructure. By the early 19th century, Britain's canal network had expanded to include major waterways such as the Leeds and Liverpool Canal and the Grand Union Canal, which connected the industrial Midlands to London. These canals played a key role in the movement of goods during the early years of the Industrial Revolution, supporting the growth of factories and industries that relied on a steady supply of raw materials. Despite the success of the canal system, it too had its limitations. Canals were expensive to build and maintain, and their speed was still limited by the slow pace of the narrowboats that traveled along them. As industrial production continued to increase and demand for faster transportation grew, attention turned to the next great innovation of the Industrial Revolution: the railway. The rise of the railway, a new era of transportation. The railway was the culmination of decades of innovation in transportation and mechanization. While steam engines had already been put to use in factories and mines, it was the adaptation of steam power to transportation that truly revolutionized the movement of goods and people. The development of steam-powered locomotives and the construction of railways transformed the industrial landscape, connecting cities, factories, and ports in ways that were previously unimaginable. The origins of the railway can be traced back to the early 19th century, when George Stephenson, an engineer and inventor, began experimenting with steam-powered locomotives. Stephenson's first successful locomotive, the Locomotion No. 1, was built in 1825 and was used on the Stockton and Darlington Railway, the world's first public railway to use steam locomotives. This railway, initially designed to transport coal from mines in County Durham to the port of Stockton-on-Tees, marked the beginning of the railway age. However, it was the opening of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway in 1830 that truly demonstrated the potential of the railway system. This railway, also built by George Stephenson, connected the industrial city of Manchester with the port city of Liverpool, providing a fast and efficient means of transporting goods and passengers between the two cities. Stephenson's locomotive, the Rocket, became famous for its speed and reliability, proving that steam-powered trains could revolutionize long-distance transportation. The success of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway sparked a railway boom in Britain. Railways began crisscrossing the country, linking industrial centers with ports, coal fields, and markets. Cities like Birmingham, Leeds, and Glasgow were soon connected by rail, facilitating the rapid movement of goods and people. The railway network allowed factories to receive raw materials more quickly and distribute their products to wider markets, boosting industrial productivity and trade. Railways also had a profound impact on urbanization and social life. For the first time, people could travel long distances quickly and affordably, leading to increased mobility and the growth of tourism. The railway network connected rural areas to urban centers, facilitating the movement of workers to industrial cities and contributing to the expansion of the working class. Railways also played a key role in shaping Britain's imperial ambitions, as they enabled the faster transport of goods and military resources to and from the British Empire's colonies. By the mid-19th century, railways had become the dominant mode of transportation in Britain, eclipsing roads and canals in speed and efficiency. The railway system not only transformed the British economy, but also served as a model for other countries that were beginning to industrialize. Railways spread across Europe, North America, and beyond, becoming a symbol of progress and modernity. Chapter 5. The Spread of Industrialization Beyond Britain. The Industrial Revolution, which had its roots in Britain, was not a phenomenon confined to the island nation for long. By the early 19th century, the transformative effects of industrialization were beginning to ripple across Europe and North America, bringing with them profound changes in economies, societies, and political structures. While Britain was the first nation to industrialize, it was by no means the last. Over time, other nations adopted and adapted British innovations, creating their own industrial landscapes and contributing to the global spread of industrialization. The spread of industrialization beyond Britain was driven by a combination of factors: the availability of natural resources, the growth of global trade networks, technological exchanges, and the efforts of entrepreneurs and governments eager to replicate Britain's success. While each nation experienced industrialization in its own way, there were common patterns that emerged, particularly the rapid development of factories, the rise of urbanization, and the reshaping of labor forces. Belgium, the first to follow. Belgium, located at the heart of Europe, was the first country on the continent to follow Britain's lead in industrialization. By the early 19th century, Belgium possessed many of the key ingredients necessary for industrial growth: a rich supply of coal and iron ore, a skilled workforce, and a well-developed system of canals and rivers for transporting goods. Additionally, Belgium's proximity to Britain facilitated the exchange of ideas, technologies, and capital, allowing Belgian entrepreneurs to adopt British innovations with relative ease. One of the key figures in Belgium's industrialization was William Cockerill, a British engineer who settled in Belgium in the early 19th century. Cockerill established a successful business manufacturing textile machinery, and his company became one of the leading producers of industrial equipment in Europe. His son, John Cockerill, expanded the business to include iron production and steam engines, further driving Belgium's industrial growth. By the 1820s and 1830s, Belgium had developed a thriving industrial sector, particularly in textiles, coal mining, and iron production. Belgium's industrialization was also supported by its government, which invested in infrastructure projects such as railways and canals to facilitate the movement of goods and raw materials. The construction of Belgium's first railway in 1835, linking Brussels and Mechelen, marked the beginning of a rapid expansion of the railway network, which played a crucial role in the country's industrial success. By the mid-19th century, Belgium had become one of the most industrialized nations in Europe, second only to Britain. France. Slow but steady. France's path to industrialization was slower and more uneven than that of Britain or Belgium, in part due to the political upheaval of the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars. These conflicts disrupted the French economy and delayed the country's industrial progress. However, by the mid-19th century, France had begun to catch up with its neighbors, particularly in the textile, coal, and iron industries. One of the key challenges that France faced in its industrialization efforts was the country's relatively small supply of coal, which was essential for powering steam engines and factories. To overcome this, the French government and entrepreneurs invested heavily in the development of coal mining regions such as the Nord-Pas-de-Calais Basin, which became one of the largest coal-producing areas in Europe. France also relied on imports of coal from Britain and Belgium to fuel its growing industries. In addition to coal, the French textile industry played a central role in the country's industrialization. Cities like Lyon, which had long been known for their silk production, became hubs of industrial activity as mechanized looms and spinning machines were introduced. The French textile industry was particularly known for its luxury goods, such as fine silks and lace, which were exported to markets across Europe and beyond. The French government, recognizing the importance of infrastructure for industrial growth, invested heavily in the expansion of railways and canals. The construction of the Paris-Lyon Railway in the 1840s helped to connect France's industrial regions with its capital and other major cities, facilitating the movement of goods and workers. By the second half of the 19th century, France had developed a strong industrial base, particularly in textiles, metallurgy, and chemicals. Germany. A late but powerful start. Germany, like France, experienced a delayed start to industrialization, largely due to its fragmented political structure. In the early 19th century, the German states were part of a loose confederation with no centralized government, which made it difficult to coordinate industrial efforts on a national scale. However, by the mid-19th century, Germany had begun to industrialize rapidly, driven by its abundant natural resources, particularly coal and iron, and its strong tradition of engineering and technical education. The unification of Germany in 1871 under Prussian leadership provided the political and economic stability needed to accelerate industrial growth. The newly unified German Empire quickly became one of the most industrialized nations in Europe, with a particular focus on heavy industries such as coal mining, iron production, and steel manufacturing. The Ruhr Valley, located in western Germany, became the heart of the country's industrial activity, producing vast quantities of coal and steel that fueled the nation's economic expansion. Germany's industrialization was also characterized by its emphasis on scientific research and technological innovation. The country's universities and technical schools became world leaders in engineering, chemistry, and physics, producing a generation of scientists and inventors who contributed to industrial progress. German companies such as Siemens, Krupp, and BASF became global leaders in industries ranging from electrical engineering to chemicals, making Germany a powerhouse of industrial innovation by the late 19th century. Germany's railway network, like those in Britain and Belgium, played a crucial role in supporting industrial growth. The development of the Zollverein, a customs union that eliminated tariffs between the German states, also helped to create a unified economic market, facilitating trade and investment across the country. By the end of the 19th century, Germany had emerged as a major industrial power, rivaling Britain in terms of industrial output and technological innovation. The United States, industrialization on a grand scale. While Europe was the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, the United States quickly became one of the leading industrial nations by the mid-19th century. The U.S. possessed several key advantages that allowed it to industrialize rapidly, including vast natural resources, a growing population, and a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship. The abundance of coal, iron, timber, and cotton in the U.S. provided the raw materials needed to fuel industrial growth, while the development of new technologies and inventions spurred progress in a wide range of industries. One of the defining features of American industrialization was its scale. The U.S. had a much larger landmass and population than any European country, which allowed for the development of large-scale industries and infrastructure projects. The construction of the Erie Canal in 1825, which connected the Great Lakes with the Atlantic Ocean, and the expansion of the railroad network were crucial to the country's industrial growth, facilitating the movement of goods and people across vast distances. The U.S. textile industry, like Britain's, was one of the first to industrialize, particularly in the New England region. The introduction of the cotton gin, invented by Eli Whitney in 1793, revolutionized the production of cotton, making it easier to separate cotton fibers from seeds and increasing the supply of raw cotton for textile mills. The American textile industry grew rapidly, and cities like Lowell, Massachusetts, became centers of industrial activity. The U.S. was also home to significant technological innovations during the Industrial Revolution, particularly in the fields of manufacturing and transportation. The development of interchangeable parts, pioneered by Whitney and others, allowed for the mass production of goods, laying the foundation for the modern factory system. In addition, inventors like Samuel Morse and Robert Fulton contributed to advances in communication and transportation, with the invention of the telegraph and the development of steamboats. By the late 19th century, the U.S. had become one of the most industrialized nations in the world, with thriving industries in textiles, steel, railroads, and manufacturing. The American economy was characterized by rapid growth, large-scale production, and the rise of powerful industrialists like Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller, who amassed vast fortunes through their control of key industries such as steel and oil. The global spread of industrialization. While Europe and the United States were the primary centers of industrialization during the 19th century, the effects of the Industrial Revolution were felt around the world. Industrialization spread to other parts of the globe through trade, colonization, and technological exchange. Countries in Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East began to adopt industrial practices, though at a slower pace than Europe, and the U.S. Japan, in particular, stands out as a country that successfully industrialized during the late 19th century. After centuries of isolation, Japan embarked on a period of rapid modernization and industrialization during the Meiji Restoration, 1868–1912. The Japanese government actively sought to adopt Western technologies and industrial practices, sending delegations to Europe and the U.S. to study their methods. Japan quickly developed industries in textiles, steel, and shipbuilding, becoming a major industrial power by the early 20th century. The spread of industrialization had profound global consequences. It led to the rise of global trade networks, the expansion of European empires, and the exploitation of natural resources in colonized regions. Industrialization also contributed to the growth of global capitalism, as countries around the world became more interconnected through trade and investment. Chapter 6: The Social Impact of the Industrial Revolution. The rapid industrialization of Britain and later other parts of the world brought profound changes not only to economies and landscapes, but also to the lives of millions of people. The Industrial Revolution transformed the social fabric of societies, creating new opportunities for wealth and innovation, while also introducing unprecedented challenges for workers, families, and communities. As factories replaced farms as the primary centers of labor, the rise of cities and urban centers reshaped the way people lived, worked, and interacted with one another. This chapter explores the far-reaching social impacts of the Industrial Revolution, from the harsh working conditions in factories to the rise of a new working class, the emergence of labor movements, and the profound changes to family life and societal roles. The human cost of industrial progress was undeniable, but the era also sparked social reform and set the stage for the rights and protections workers would later fight to secure. The rise of the working class, from fields to factories. Before the Industrial Revolution, most people in Britain and Europe lived in rural areas, working on farms or in small-scale trades. Life was centered around agricultural production, and many families operated small farms or worked as laborers for larger landowners. However, as factories began to emerge in the late 18th century, this rural way of life started to change. The increasing demand for labor in the new industrial centers drew people away from the countryside and into cities, where they became part of the growing urban working class. The migration of rural populations to urban areas was driven by several factors, including the enclosure movement, which consolidated farmland and displaced small farmers, and the growing opportunities for employment in factories. In cities like Manchester, Birmingham, and London, factories offered the promise of steady wages, though the reality of factory life was often far from ideal. For many workers, the transition from rural to urban life was difficult. In the countryside, families had worked at their own pace, often in close-knit communities. In the factories, workers found themselves subject to the rigid discipline of the industrial system, with long hours, monotonous tasks, and strict supervision. Factory owners, motivated by the need to maximize efficiency and profits, imposed tight schedules and harsh working conditions on their employees. A typical factory shift could last anywhere from 12 to 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, leaving workers with little time for rest or leisure. The work was physically demanding, and the repetitive tasks required by factory machines often led to fatigue and injury. In textile mills, for example, workers, many of whom were women and children, were responsible for tending spinning machines and looms, often in hot, noisy, and poorly ventilated environments. In mines and ironworks, men performed backbreaking labor, extracting coal and ore from deep underground or operating heavy machinery in dangerous conditions. One of the most notable changes brought about by industrialization was the widespread employment of women and children in factories. Factory owners preferred to hire women and children because they could pay them lower wages than adult men, and their small hands were often better suited to operating delicate machines. Children as young as 5 or 6 were employed in factories, where they worked long hours under hazardous conditions. Child labor became a widespread feature of the industrial workforce, with children often performing the most dangerous and grueling tasks. Harsh conditions in factories and mines. The working conditions in early factories and mines were notoriously harsh. In the textile industry, workers were exposed to dangerous machinery with little to no safety precautions. Accidents were common, and injuries such as crushed fingers, amputated limbs, and even death were not unusual. In many factories, workers were fined or punished for falling behind on their tasks, and the relentless pace of work left little room for breaks. Mines, particularly coal mines, were some of the most dangerous places to work. Miners faced the constant threat of cave-ins, explosions, and suffocation from toxic gases. In some mines, children and women worked alongside men, crawling through narrow tunnels to extract coal or operate pumps. The long hours spent underground, coupled with the physical demands of the work, took a toll on miners' health, leading to chronic illnesses such as black lung disease. Housing conditions in industrial cities were equally grim. The rapid urbanization that accompanied industrialization led to overcrowding, as cities struggled to accommodate the influx of workers. Many factory workers lived in cramped, poorly constructed tenements that lacked basic sanitation and clean water. Disease spread quickly in these conditions, and outbreaks of cholera, typhoid, and tuberculosis were common in industrial cities. Despite these hardships, workers continued to migrate to cities in search of employment, as factory work, however difficult, offered a steady income. The rise of the working class became one of the defining features of the Industrial Revolution, as millions of people were drawn into the new industrial economy, fundamentally altering the social structure of Britain and other industrializing nations. The emergence of labor movements and social reform. As the industrial economy expanded and the working class grew, workers began to organize in response to the harsh conditions they faced in factories and mines. The early labor movement was born out of the need for workers to protect their rights, demand better wages, and improve working conditions. Workers formed trade unions, which allowed them to collectively bargain with employers and advocate for labor reforms. The first half of the 19th century saw several key moments in the rise of labor movements. One of the most significant was the Luddite movement, which emerged in the early 1800s in response to the mechanization of the textile industry. The Luddites, named after the mythical figure Ned Ludd, were groups of skilled textile workers who protested against the introduction of machines that threatened their jobs. They saw mechanization as a direct threat to their livelihoods and responded by destroying machinery in factories. Although the Luddite movement was ultimately suppressed by the government, it highlighted the growing tensions between workers and industrialists. Another pivotal moment in the labor movement came with the formation of the Chartist movement in the 1830s and 1840s. The Chartists were a working-class political movement that sought to achieve political and social reforms, including universal male suffrage, better working conditions, and fair representation in Parliament. Although the Chartists were not immediately successful in achieving their goals, their movement laid the groundwork for future labor activism and the eventual expansion of voting rights in Britain. In the second half of the 19th century, the labor movement gained momentum, and trade unions became more organized and influential. Strikes and protests became more common, as workers demanded shorter hours, higher wages, and improved working conditions. The Factory Acts, a series of laws passed by the British Parliament beginning in the 1830s, were among the first attempts to regulate working conditions. These laws limited the working hours of women and children and set basic safety standards for factories. While these early reforms were limited in scope, they represented the beginning of a broader movement for social justice and workers' rights. The labor movement was not limited to Britain. As industrialization spread to Europe and North America, so too did the struggle for workers' rights. In the United States, labor unions such as the Knights of Labor and the American Federation of Labor fought for better wages, shorter working hours, and safer working conditions. Across Europe, labor movements gained strength, culminating in mass strikes and protests that shaped the political and social landscape of the 19th and early 20th centuries. Changes in family life and gender roles. The Industrial Revolution brought significant changes to family life and gender roles, as the demands of factory work reshaped the traditional structure of households. In pre-industrial societies, families often worked together as a unit, with each member contributing to agricultural production or home-based trades. However, with the rise of factories, the separation between work and home became more pronounced. Men, women, and children were increasingly drawn into the factory system, where they worked long hours away from home. For many families, this shift meant that they could no longer rely on the support and cooperation of extended family members, as they had in rural communities. Instead, the nuclear family became the dominant household structure in industrial cities, with parents and children working in different capacities to support the family's income. Women, in particular, experienced significant changes in their roles during the Industrial Revolution. While some women continued to work in traditional domestic roles, many entered the workforce in factories, textile mills, and mines. Working-class women often had to balance the demands of factory work with the responsibilities of caring for their children and maintaining the household. The rise of female labor in factories challenged traditional gender roles and sparked debates about the place of women in society. Middle-class women, on the other hand, were increasingly expected to conform to the ideal of the domestic sphere, where they were responsible for managing the household and raising children while their husbands worked in the public sphere. This ideal, known as the cult of domesticity, emphasized the importance of women's roles as wives and mothers, reinforcing traditional gender roles even as industrialization created new opportunities for women in the workforce. The growth of social reform movements. The harsh realities of industrial life also gave rise to a range of social reform movements aimed at addressing the negative impacts of industrialization. Reformers, many of whom were motivated by religious or humanitarian concerns, sought to improve the living and working conditions of the working class, reduce poverty, and promote education and public health. One of the most influential social reformers of the period was Robert Owen, a Welsh industrialist who became a leading advocate for workers' rights and social justice. Owen believed that industrial progress could be harnessed to improve society, and he implemented a range of progressive reforms in the cotton mills he managed in New Lanark, Scotland. These reforms included shorter working hours, better housing for workers, and access to education for children. Owen's ideas laid the foundation for the cooperative movement and inspired other industrialists to adopt more humane labor practices. Religious organizations also played a key role in social reform. The Methodist Church, in particular, was active in promoting education, temperance, and charitable work among the working class. Many religious reformers sought to address the moral and social challenges posed by industrialization, including alcoholism, crime, and poor living conditions. The growth of public education during the Industrial Revolution was another important aspect of social reform. As industrial economies expanded, the need for a more educated workforce became apparent. Governments and reformers alike recognized the importance of providing education to children, and public schooling became more widespread in the second half of the 19th century. The introduction of compulsory education laws in Britain and other industrialized nations helped to reduce child labor and improve literacy rates among the working class. Outro: the legacy of the Industrial Revolution. As the steam engines quiet and the factories settle into stillness, we reflect on the remarkable transformation that was the Industrial Revolution, a period of innovation and upheaval that forever changed the world. From the small villages of Britain to the bustling cities of Europe and North America, industrialization reached every corner of society, reshaping not only economies but also the very fabric of human life. What began as a series of technological breakthroughs in agriculture and manufacturing evolved into a global movement that brought the rise of factories, the expansion of cities, and the creation of new social classes. Workers flocked to urban centers, where long hours and harsh conditions became the norm. But these sacrifices laid the groundwork for the world we know today, one marked by the mass production of goods, the rapid exchange of ideas, and the growth of interconnected economies. While the Industrial Revolution brought undeniable progress, it also left deep challenges in its wake. The struggles of workers in factories and mines gave birth to labor movements and reforms that shaped the rights of employees in the centuries to come. The expansion of industrial power led to the exploitation of both natural resources and human labor, creating tensions that would echo across the world. Yet, out of these challenges, new ideas of social justice, fairness, and reform emerged. Ideas that still shape our societies. The innovations of this era, from steam power to mechanized production, formed the foundation of the modern world. The scientific advancements, new transportation systems, and technological breakthroughs of the Industrial Revolution continue to influence the way we live, work, and interact. We owe much of our modern conveniences and comforts to the ingenuity and ambition of the pioneers who pushed the boundaries of what was possible during this transformative time. As we look back on the Industrial Revolution, we are reminded of the enduring power of human curiosity and determination. This era of discovery was not just about machines and factories. It was about the human spirit striving to create, innovate, and improve. The Industrial Revolution may have ended, but its legacy continues, woven into the fabric of our everyday lives.